Hi, I'm Natalie Brooks. 3 days ago, I held my newborn daughter for the first time while staring at a photo that made my blood run cold. My sister Vanessa had sent it with a single text. Oops! Slipped while helping. The image showed my carefully prepared nursery completely destroyed. Crib overturned, walls stripped bare, months of preparation obliterated. She did this while I was in labor, fighting for my life and my babies. But what happened next changed everything. Because my father-in-law isn't just any grandfather. He's a Marine general with 40 years of service, and when he saw what Vanessa had done to his son's family, he made a call that would echo through our entire bloodline. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The California sun was setting behind the palm trees outside Riverside Medical Center, casting long shadows across the hospital parking lot. I had been in labor for 18 hours, and Derek was holding my hand so tightly I thought he might break it. The contractions were coming faster now, each one feeling like my body was being torn apart from the inside. My husband's face was pale beneath his Marine buzz cut, and I could see the fear in his eyes that he was trying so hard to hide behind his military composure. "She's coming, Nat," he whispered, brushing my sweat-soaked hair from my forehead. "Our little girl is almost here." I managed a weak smile between the waves of pain. We had been planning for this moment for months. The nursery at home was perfect. Soft lavender walls with hand-painted butterflies, a white crib that Derek had assembled himself, tiny clothes folded in rainbow order in the dresser drawers. Everything was ready for Isabella Rose Winters, our miracle baby after 3 years of trying. "Did you remember to lock the front door?" I gasped as another contraction hit. "I know Vanessa has the spare key, but, babe, don't worry about that now," Derek said, though I caught the slight tension in his jaw. My sister had been staying with us for the past week, claiming she wanted to help when the baby arrived. Derek had never said it outright, but I could tell he wasn't comfortable with her being in our house while we were gone. Vanessa had always been unpredictable, jealous of anything good that happened to me since we were children. Dr. Martinez appeared between my legs, her kind face serious but encouraging. "All right, Natalie, this is it. I need you to push with the next contraction. Your baby is ready to meet you." The next few minutes blurred together in a haze of pain, pressure, and overwhelming emotion. Derek's voice anchoring me, the doctor's steady commands, and then suddenly, a cry. Not mine, but high and pure and perfect. "She's here," Dr. Martinez announced, holding up the tiny, squirming form of our daughter. Isabella Rose Winters, born at 8:47 p.m., 6 pounds, 4 ounces. The tears came instantly, streaming down my face as they placed her on my chest. She was so small, so perfect, with Derek's dark hair and what looked like my green eyes. Her tiny fist curled around my finger, and I felt my heart expand in ways I never knew were possible. Derek was crying too, something I had only seen him do once before, at his grandfather's funeral. "She's beautiful, Nat. She's absolutely perfect." The next hour passed in a golden bubble of happiness. Isabella latched on for her first feeding while Derek called his parents to share the news. His father, General Robert Winters, was currently stationed at Camp Pendleton just 40 minutes away. His mother, Carol, was probably already in her car, racing to meet her first grandchild. "Dad's over the moon," Derek said, sliding his phone back into his pocket. "He's coming tomorrow morning after he handles some business on base. Mom will be here within the hour with enough baby supplies to stock a small country." I laughed softly, still staring down at Isabella's peaceful face. "What about my parents? Did you call them?" Derek's expression shifted slightly. "I tried. It went to voicemail. I'll keep trying." My parents lived in Phoenix, and while we weren't estranged exactly, our relationship had been strained since I married Derek. They had never understood why I would want to be a military wife, moving from base to base, dealing with deployments and uncertainty. My mother, Patricia, had made several pointed comments about how I was throwing away my potential for a man who might never be around. "They'll come around once they see her," I said, though part of me wasn't entirely sure. How could anyone not fall in love with this face? A nurse came in to check on us, cooing over Isabella and helping me adjust my position. Everything felt surreal and wonderful, like I was floating in a dream I never wanted to wake up from. The trauma of labor was already fading, replaced by this overwhelming sense of completion and purpose. "Mrs. Winters," the nurse said gently, "visiting hours are almost over, but since this is your first night, your husband can stay. Is there anyone else you'd like to call?" I thought about Vanessa back at the house. She had seemed genuinely excited about becoming an aunt, even volunteering to help set up the nursery and stock the refrigerator while we were at the hospital. Maybe I had been too quick to judge her recent behavior as jealousy. Perhaps having a niece would bring out the best in her. "Could you call my sister?" I asked Derek. "Let her know Isabella arrived safely? She's been so helpful this week. I know she'll want to hear." Derek hesitated for just a moment, then nodded. "Of course. I'll step outside and give her a call." While he was gone, I held Isabella close and let myself imagine our future together. Family dinners around our dining table, holidays with Derek's parents who had already shown me more warmth and acceptance than my own family ever had. Watching her take her first steps in our living room, teaching her to ride a bike in our driveway. The house we had bought in Riverside was perfect for raising children. A quiet neighborhood with good schools, close enough to the base for Derek's work, but far enough away to feel like civilian life. Derek returned a few minutes later, his face troubled. "No answer," he said. Her phone went straight to voicemail. "That's weird," I said, shifting Isabella to my shoulder. "She knew we were having the baby today. Maybe she's just sleeping." "Maybe," Derek agreed, but he didn't sound convinced. He settled into the uncomfortable hospital chair next to my bed, reaching over to stroke Isabella's tiny hand. "Don't worry about it tonight. Tomorrow we'll be home with our daughter, and everything will be perfect." I believed him. Lying in that hospital bed with my husband beside me and my daughter in my arms, I believed that we had everything we needed. I believed that our families would rally around us, that Vanessa would step up and be the aunt Isabella deserved, that my parents would see what Derek and I had built together and finally understand. I had no idea that while I was bringing life into the world, my sister was systematically destroying the home we had prepared for that life. I didn't know that she had spent the evening methodically dismantling everything Derek and I had created, piece by piece, room by room. I couldn't have imagined that the woman I had trusted with our house key would use those hours of my vulnerability to unleash years of resentment and jealousy on the most precious space in our home. The photo wouldn't come until morning, but the damage was already done. While Isabella and I slept peacefully in our hospital room, dreaming of homecomings and new beginnings, our sanctuary was being transformed into a crime scene of sibling rivalry and deliberate cruelty. Derek dozed fitfully in his chair, his military training keeping him alert even in sleep. Every time a nurse came in to check on us, he was immediately awake and alert, protective instincts on high alert. He had always been like that, watching over me with the same intensity he brought to his duties as a Marine captain. It was one of the things I loved most about him, that unwavering sense of loyalty and protection. "You should go home and get some real sleep," I whispered during one of his waking moments around 3 a.m. "Shower. Change clothes. We'll still be here when you get back." He shook his head firmly. "I'm not leaving you two. Not tonight." "The house is only 20 minutes away," I pressed gently. "You could check on Vanessa, make sure everything's okay, since she didn't answer her phone." Something flickered across Derek's face at the mention of my sister, but he just reached over and squeezed my hand. "Everything can wait until morning. Right now, the only place I want to be is here with my girls." Looking back, I wonder if some part of him already knew. If his military instincts were picking up on something wrong, some threat he couldn't quite identify. Derek had served 2 tours overseas. He knew how to read danger, how to sense when something was off. Maybe that's why he refused to leave our side that night, why he kept checking his phone, why his jaw stayed tight even in his happiest moments with Isabella. Or maybe I'm giving him too much credit. Maybe none of us could have predicted what Vanessa was capable of, the level of calculated destruction she would unleash while I fought to bring his daughter safely into the world. Maybe the signs were there all along, and we were just too trusting, too focused on our own happiness to see the storm building in someone we thought we could trust. The nurses came and went through the night, checking Isabella's vitals, helping me with feeding, monitoring my recovery. Each time, they commented on what a beautiful baby she was, how alert and calm she seemed. One older nurse named Patricia told me that in 30 years of delivery room experience, she rarely saw such a peaceful newborn. "She knows she's safe," the nurse said, adjusting Isabella's tiny hospital bracelet. "Babies can sense when they're surrounded by love. This little one hit the jackpot with you two." I felt tears prick my eyes again. After years of trying, months of pregnancy fears, and hours of difficult labor, holding Isabella felt like the culmination of every dream I'd ever had. Derek and I had built something beautiful together. A marriage, a home, a future. And now we had this perfect little person to share it all with. Dawn was breaking through the hospital windows when my phone finally buzzed with a text message. I reached for it carefully, trying not to disturb Isabella, who was sleeping peacefully against my chest.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
The message was from Vanessa, and my heart lifted with relief. Finally, she was checking in. But as I opened the message and saw the photo that would shatter my world, I realized that some betrayals are so deep, so calculated, that they change you at a cellular level. The image on my screen showed our nursery, our beautiful, carefully prepared sanctuary for Isabella, completely destroyed. The crib was overturned, stuffing scattered everywhere from torn cushions. The mobile Derek had hung so carefully ripped from the ceiling and broken on the floor. And underneath the photo, a message that made my blood turn to ice. "Oops, slipped while helping. Guess the baby won't be needing this anymore. Hope labor was worth it." Derek saw my face before he saw the phone, and I watched his expression transform from sleepy contentment to sharp alertness in a split second. When I wordlessly handed him the device, the sound that came from his throat was something between a growl and a gasp. "That's our house," he said, his voice deadly quiet. "That's Isabella's room." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The magnitude of what Vanessa had done was hitting me in waves. This wasn't just destruction of property. This was a deliberate attack on our family, timed for maximum cruelty. While I was in the most vulnerable moment of my life, while Derek was focused entirely on supporting me through labor, his sister had used our trust to violate the most sacred space in our home. The happy bubble of new parenthood burst around us like a punctured balloon. Derek was already reaching for his phone, his face hard with military determination. "I'm calling the base. I'm calling my father." "Derek, wait," I said, though I wasn't sure why. Maybe some part of me still hoped this was a mistake, a misunderstanding, anything other than the deliberate cruelty it so obviously was. "No," he said firmly, his finger already dialing. "This crosses every line. She did this while you were having our baby, Nat, while we trusted her with our home." As Derek spoke quietly but intensely into his phone, I stared down at Isabella's peaceful face and felt something shift inside me. The woman who had walked into this hospital yesterday, trusting, optimistic, always looking for the best in people, was gone. In her place was someone harder, someone who had learned that family could be the source of the deepest wounds. I didn't know it yet, but Derek wasn't just calling his father for emotional support. General Robert Winters had spent 4 decades in the Marine Corps, rising to command positions that required decisive action in the face of threats to his people. And when he heard what had been done to his son's family while they welcomed his granddaughter into the world, he would respond with the full weight of his authority and the unwavering loyalty that had defined his entire career. The war was about to begin, and Vanessa had no idea what she had just unleashed. The discharge process from Riverside Medical Center felt like moving through thick fog. Every nurse congratulated us on Isabella's perfect health scores. Every orderly smiled at our beautiful family tableau. But all I could think about was the image burned into my phone screen. Derek had deleted the photo after taking screenshots for evidence, but I could still see it every time I closed my eyes. Our nursery, violated and destroyed while I brought our daughter into the world. Derek loaded our bags into his truck with military precision, his jaw set in a line I recognized from his deployment photos. He had switched into what I privately called his mission mode, focused, controlled, and absolutely lethal in his calm determination. As he secured Isabella's car seat with practiced efficiency, I caught him checking his phone for the third time in 10 minutes. "Any word from your father?" I asked, settling into the passenger seat and immediately reaching back to touch Isabella's tiny hand. She was sleeping peacefully, completely unaware that we were driving toward a home that no longer felt safe. "He's handling it," Derek said simply, but there was something in his tone that suggested handling it meant more than I might expect. Mom's meeting us at the house with cleaning supplies and a temporary crib she borrowed from the neighbor. "We'll make it work, Nat." The 20-minute drive from the hospital to our home in Riverside's Magnolia Heights neighborhood usually felt like a peaceful transition from the busy world to our sanctuary. Today, it felt like approaching a crime scene. Every familiar landmark, the corner market where we bought late-night ice cream, the park where we'd imagined pushing Isabella on swings, now seemed tainted by what waited for us. "I keep thinking about the timing," I said quietly, watching the suburban streets roll past. "She had to start destroying things the moment we left for the hospital. How long do you think it took her to do all that damage?" Derek's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "Long enough to be deliberate. Long enough to think about what she was doing at every step." Our house came into view, a modest 2-story colonial with the blue front door Derek had painted last spring. His mother Carol's silver sedan was already in the driveway, and I could see her moving purposefully around the front yard, collecting debris. Even from the street, we could see that Vanessa's destruction hadn't been contained to the nursery. Broken flower pots lined the walkway, and what looked like torn photographs were scattered across the lawn. Carol met us at the truck before we could even unbuckle Isabella's car seat. At 62, Derek's mother still carried herself with the bearing of a military spouse who had weathered decades of uncertainty and challenge. Her silver hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her usually warm brown eyes were blazing with controlled fury. "Don't go inside yet," she said firmly, taking the car seat from Derek's hands with practiced grandmother expertise. "Let me show you what we're dealing with first." She led us up the front walkway, pointing out the scattered debris. "These are your wedding photos," she said, indicating torn pieces of paper among the broken pottery. She pulled them out of frames and left them here like garbage. "The frames are inside, smashed." My legs felt unsteady. Our wedding photos had been displayed in the hallway leading to the nursery, beautiful memories of the happiest day of our lives. The idea that Vanessa had specifically targeted those images felt like another layer of calculated cruelty. "Mom, how bad is it inside?" Derek asked, his voice carefully controlled. Carol's expression softened slightly as she looked down at Isabella. "The living room and kitchen are mostly intact, though she went through your refrigerator and left spoiled food everywhere. The master bedroom has some damage. Clothes pulled out and scattered, but nothing that can't be cleaned up. But the nursery..." She paused, looking between Derek and me. "It's going to take time to rebuild." Derek reached for my hand as we approached the front door. "Whatever we see in there, we handle it together. The important thing is that we're all safe, and we have each other." The moment we stepped inside, the smell hit us. Something rotten and deliberate. Like Vanessa had specifically chosen the most offensive items from our refrigerator and left them to ferment. The living room looked relatively normal, except for couch cushions thrown on the floor and books scattered from their shelves. But as we moved deeper into the house, the damage became more apparent and more personal. In the kitchen, every cabinet door hung open, and the contents had been swept onto the floor. Broken dishes mixed with scattered cereal and pasta, creating a minefield of sharp edges and sticky mess. The refrigerator door stood ajar, and I could see that Vanessa had pulled out everything that could spoil and left it to rot on the counters. "She wanted us to come home to this smell," I said, covering my nose with Isabella's receiving blanket. "She wanted our first moments home with the baby to be ruined." Derek was already moving through the kitchen, taking photos with his phone and making mental notes. "This is evidence," he said grimly. "Every bit of this is documentation of what she did." We made our way upstairs, Carol leading with Isabella, while Derek and I surveyed the damage to our bedroom. Vanessa had pulled every piece of clothing from our closet and dresser, leaving them in tangled piles on the floor. She had emptied my jewelry box, scattering necklaces and earrings across the room like confetti. but it was the mirror that stopped me cold. Written across our bedroom mirror in what looked like lipstick were the words, "Hope Derek was worth giving up your real family for." The message hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about jealousy or sibling rivalry. This was about my choice to marry Derek, to build a life that didn't revolve around my sister's needs and drama. Vanessa had always resented that I found happiness with someone who put me first, who protected me instead of using me. "Nat," Derek said quietly, his voice tight with controlled rage. "You need to see the nursery." I had been dreading this moment since seeing the photo in the hospital. Nothing could have prepared me for the reality. Our beautiful lavender nursery looked like a war zone. The crib Derek had so carefully assembled was overturned and broken, its white slats splintered and scattered. The changing table was on its side, and every tiny outfit we had lovingly folded was torn or stained with what smelled like spoiled milk. But it was the walls that broke my heart completely. The hand-painted butterflies that had taken me weeks to complete were scraped away, leaving ugly gouges in the drywall. The growth chart Derek's father had made in his workshop was torn down and broken into pieces. Even the outlet covers, chosen in careful coordination with our color scheme, had been ripped out and thrown across the room. "She destroyed everything," I whispered, sinking into the rocking chair that somehow remained untouched. It was the only piece of furniture in the room still in its proper place, as if Vanessa had wanted me to sit here and survey the damage she had wrought. Carol appeared in the doorway, still holding Isabella's car seat. "I've called a cleaning service," she said gently. "They'll be here this afternoon to handle the kitchen and help with the nursery. And Robert is on his way with some of his men." Derek looked up sharply from where he was photographing the damaged crib. "Dad's bringing Marines here? Your father takes threats to his family very seriously," Carol said with a slight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "When I told him what your sister-in-law did while you were welcoming his granddaughter into the world, he had some very specific thoughts about appropriate responses." The doorbell rang downstairs, and Carol went to answer it while Derek and I continued documenting the damage. I could hear voices in the foyer, but couldn't make out the words. A few minutes later, Carol returned with a woman I didn't recognize. "This is Detective Lauren Hayes," Carol said. "She's here to take an official report." Detective Hayes was a compact woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. She moved through our destroyed nursery with professional efficiency, taking photos and notes while asking careful questions about our relationship with Vanessa and the timeline of events. "Has your sister ever exhibited destructive behavior before?" she asked, crouching to examine the damaged wall where my butterflies used to dance. I thought about all the times growing up when Vanessa's jealousy had manifested in smaller ways. The accidents that destroyed my school projects, the deliberate social sabotage when boys showed interest in me, the way she would systematically undermine any success or happiness I achieved. "Nothing like this," I said slowly. "But there's been a pattern of interference, especially when it comes to my relationship with Derek." Derek looked up from his documentation. "She's never liked our marriage. Always made comments about how Natalie was quote, wasting her potential on military life." Detective Hayes nodded, making notes. "The timing of this destruction is particularly concerning. The fact that she waited until you were in labor suggests premeditation. This wasn't an impulse. This was planned." The weight of that realization settled over me like a heavy blanket. While I was preparing for Isabella's arrival, Vanessa was planning this attack. While Derek and I were excited about becoming parents, she was calculating how to cause us the maximum pain during our most vulnerable moment. "What happens now?" Derek asked. "I'll file the report and forward it to the district attorney's office," Detective Hayes said. "The level of destruction here, combined with the timing and the obvious intent to cause emotional distress, could result in several charges: breaking and entering, destruction of property, possibly harassment or stalking depending on her previous behavior." After Detective Hayes left, Derek and I sat in the devastated nursery with Isabella sleeping peacefully between us. The irony wasn't lost on me. Our daughter was perfect and healthy, completely unaware that the room prepared for her homecoming had been turned into a monument to family cruelty. "I keep thinking about what my parents will say," I admitted, touching Isabella's tiny fingers. "They always told me Vanessa was just spirited or misunderstood. They made excuses for her behavior for so long that I started believing maybe I was the problem." Derek shifted closer to me on the floor, careful not to disturb the baby. You're not the problem, Nat. You never were. This isn't about sibling rivalry or family dynamics. This is about someone who chose to attack us when we were at our most vulnerable. The sound of vehicles pulling into our driveway interrupted our conversation. Through the nursery window, I could see several dark SUVs and what looked like a military transport truck. Derek moved to the window and let out a low whistle. "That's Dad," he said, and there was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Pride mixed with relief and maybe just a hint of anticipation. We made our way downstairs as the front door opened. General Robert Winters filled the doorway, his imposing 6'4" frame dressed in combat utilities. Behind him were 6 Marines in full gear, moving with the coordinated efficiency of a unit on a mission. "Son," the general said, embracing Derek briefly before turning to me. "Natalie, how are you holding up?" "We're managing, sir," I said, though my voice shook slightly. I had always been somewhat intimidated by Derek's father, not because he was unkind, but because he commanded the kind of respect that comes from 4 decades of military leadership. General Winters moved to peer into Isabella's car seat, and his stern expression immediately softened. "There's my granddaughter," he said quietly, his voice filled with wonder. "Perfect timing," Isabella rose. "Your grandfather needed a reminder of what we're protecting." He straightened up and surveyed the damage visible from the entryway. "I've seen the photos Carol sent. This was an attack on my family, and attacks on Marine families require appropriate responses." One of the Marines stepped forward, a sergeant with kind eyes, who introduced himself as Sergeant Martinez. "Sir, we've completed the preliminary sweep. No signs of the perpetrator on the property, but we found evidence of forced entry through the back sliding door." "Forced entry?" Derek asked sharply. "But she had our spare key." General Winters' expression darkened. "She wanted it to look like a break-in initially. More charges, more consequences. Your sister underestimated who she was dealing with." As the Marines moved efficiently through our house, documenting additional evidence and securing the property, I found myself watching General Winters with new understanding. This wasn't just a grandfather upset about his family being attacked. This was a military commander who had spent his career protecting people from those who would do them harm, and he was applying that same strategic thinking to our situation. "What's the plan?" Derek asked his father quietly. General Winters smiled, and it wasn't entirely pleasant. "Your sister thinks she can attack a Marine family while they're welcoming a new life into the world and face no consequences. She's about to learn that actions have repercussions, especially when those actions target people under my protection." He turned to Sergeant Martinez. "Contact Base Legal. I want to know every option we have for pursuing this through military channels, in addition to civilian prosecution. And get me a complete background check on Vanessa Brooks. I want to know everywhere she's been, everyone she's talked to, every digital footprint she's left in the past month." The transformation in our house was remarkable. Within 2 hours, the Marines had documented every aspect of the damage, collected evidence I never would have thought to preserve, and coordinated with Detective Hayes to ensure nothing was missed. They moved with the kind of precision that comes from years of training, treating our destroyed nursery like a mission-critical operation. But it was General Winters' quiet conversation with Carol that made me understand the true scope of what was happening. As I fed Isabella in the kitchen while Derek worked with the Marines, I overheard fragments of their discussion. "She chose the wrong family to target," General Winters was saying, "and she chose the wrong time. When you attack a Marine family during a moment of joy and vulnerability, you're not just committing a crime, you're declaring war." Carol's response was too quiet for me to hear, but her tone suggested complete agreement. This family that had welcomed me with open arms from the moment Derek brought me home was now closing ranks around Isabella and me with military precision. As evening fell and the Marines completed their work, Derek and I found ourselves alone in our restored kitchen. The cleaning service had worked miracles, and while the nursery remained unusable, the rest of our house was beginning to feel like home again. "Your father scares me a little," I admitted to Derek as we shared a quiet dinner. "But I'm grateful he's on our side." Derek smiled for the first time since we'd received Vanessa's photo. Dad doesn't just command Marines, Nat. He protects families. And now you and Isabella are his family, too. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, and my stomach clenched with anxiety. But when I opened it, I found a message that made tears spring to my eyes. Mrs. Winters, this is Sergeant Martinez. On behalf of the Marines who secured your home today, we want you to know that Isabella Rose has the protection of the United States Marine Corps. No one threatens a Marine family on our watch. Semper Fi. I showed the message to Derek and watched as his eyes filled with pride and emotion. That's my family, he said quietly. That's who we are now. Looking down at Isabella sleeping peacefully in her temporary bassinet, I realized that Vanessa's attack had backfired in ways she could never have anticipated. Instead of isolating us or breaking our spirits, she had activated a network of protection and support that she couldn't have imagined in her worst nightmares. The woman who had destroyed our nursery while I gave birth was about to discover that she hadn't just attacked Natalie and Derek Winters. She had attacked a Marine family, and that was an entirely different kind of enemy to make. 3 days after coming home from the hospital, I was feeding Isabella in our temporary nursery setup when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The caller ID showed a Phoenix area code, and my heart sank. I had been dreading this conversation since Detective Hayes filed her report. Hello, Natalie. My mother's voice was crisp and controlled, the tone she used when she was about to deliver a lecture. I think we need to talk about this situation with Vanessa. I shifted Isabella to my shoulder, taking comfort in her warm weight against my chest. Mom, did you see the photos the police sent you? Did you see what she did to our home while I was in labor? I saw pictures of a messy house, Patricia said dismissively. But calling the police on your own sister? Having her arrested? That's not how family handles problems, Natalie. The familiar knot of frustration formed in my stomach. Even faced with photographic evidence of deliberate destruction, my mother was still making excuses for Vanessa. She broke into our home and destroyed our baby's nursery. This isn't a family disagreement, Mom. It's a crime. Vanessa says she was trying to help, Patricia continued, her voice taking on the patient tone she'd used my entire childhood when explaining why I needed to be more understanding of my sister's behavior. She says she was rearranging things and accidentally knocked over some furniture. She never meant for things to get out of hand. I closed my eyes, feeling the old pattern trying to reassert itself. For 28 years, I had listened to these explanations, these gentle suggestions that maybe I was overreacting, maybe I wasn't seeing the whole picture, maybe I needed to try harder to understand Vanessa's perspective. Mom, she wrote, hope Derek was worth giving up your real family for, on our bedroom mirror. She tore up our wedding photos and scattered them on the lawn. She destroyed hand-painted artwork I spent weeks creating for my daughter. How exactly do you accidentally do those things? There was a pause, and I could hear my father's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out the words. When Patricia spoke again, her tone had shifted slightly, less certain but still defensive. Well, perhaps she was upset. You know how emotional she gets when she feels left out. Maybe if you had included her more in the pregnancy, made her feel more like an aunt. I gave her our house key, I said, my voice rising slightly before I caught myself. Isabella stirred against my shoulder, and I forced myself to speak more quietly. I trusted her with our home while we were at the most vulnerable moment of our lives. How much more included could she have been? Don't raise your voice at me, Natalie, Patricia snapped. I'm trying to help you see this from Vanessa's perspective. She's been struggling since you moved away, and then you get married, buy a house, have a baby. Can't you understand how that might make her feel? The old guilt tried to creep in, the familiar sense that somehow my happiness was responsible for Vanessa's problems. But holding Isabella, surrounded by the evidence of what my sister had done during the most sacred moment of our lives, I felt something shift inside me. No, Mom. I can't understand how my having a baby justifies destroying my home, and I won't apologize for building a life that makes me happy. I ended the call before Patricia could respond, my hands shaking slightly as I set the phone aside. Isabella looked up at me with Derek's dark eyes, completely trusting and peaceful, and I felt my resolve strengthen. Whatever patterns had existed in my family before, they stopped here. My daughter would never grow up walking on eggshells around someone else's jealousy and resentment. Derek found me an hour later, still sitting in the rocking chair with Isabella, staring out the window at the front yard where Marines had collected pieces of our torn wedding photos. "How did it go with your mom?" he asked gently, settling on the floor beside my chair. "About how you'd expect," I said, stroking Isabella's soft hair. "Vanessa was just upset, just emotional, just misunderstood. I'm the one who's overreacting by involving the police." Derek's jaw tightened. "Even after seeing the evidence?" "She says Vanessa was trying to help and things got out of hand." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. 28 years of making excuses for her, and they're not about to stop now. "Well," Derek said, pulling out his phone, "maybe this will change their perspective." He showed me a series of text messages from an unknown number, all sent to his phone over the past 2 days. The messages were from Vanessa, and they revealed a level of planning and malice that even I hadn't fully grasped. "Hope you enjoyed your little family moment," read the first message. "Too bad you'll never feel safe in that house again." The second was worse. "Every time you look at that nursery, you'll remember that I was there, that I could be there again." But it was the third message that made my blood run cold. Natalie always was weak. Now she gets to raise a weak baby with a fake soldier who thinks his uniform makes him special. Derek had screenshot all of them. "She's been sending these since we got home from the hospital. Detective Hayes has copies, and Dad's legal team is reviewing them for federal charges, since they could be considered cyber harassment of military personnel." I stared at the messages, feeling pieces click into place. She's not done. This wasn't just about destroying the nursery. She wants us to live in fear. "That's what Dad thinks too," Derek said grimly, "which is why he's taking this so seriously. This isn't just property damage anymore. It's an ongoing threat to a military family." As if summoned by our conversation, General Winter's truck pulled into our driveway. Through the window, I could see him talking on his phone, his expression serious and focused. When he finally came to the door, he was carrying a thick manila folder. "Natalie, Derek," he said, settling into our living room with the bearing of a man conducting a military briefing. "We need to discuss what we've learned about Vanessa's activities." He opened the folder and spread several documents across our coffee table. "My legal team has been conducting a thorough investigation into your sister's background and recent behavior. What we found is concerning." The first document was a credit report showing significant debt and multiple missed payments. The second was a series of social media posts Vanessa had made over the past 6 months, documenting her increasing resentment toward Derek and me. "She's been planning this for a while," General Winters said, pointing to posts that showed Vanessa's growing obsession with our pregnancy and preparations for Isabella. "Look at the dates on these posts." I leaned forward to read them, my stomach sinking with each entry. 3 months ago. Some people get everything handed to them while others struggle. 2 months ago. Funny how military wives think they're so special. 1 month ago. Can't wait to meet my niece. Hope she's worth all the fuss. The quotation marks around niece made my skin crawl. Even then, Vanessa was already distancing herself from Isabella, already planning something that would harm our family. "But this is the most concerning discovery," General Winters continued, sliding another document toward us. It was a printed email thread between Vanessa and someone named Marcus Chen, discussing, quote, "teaching military families that they're not untouchable." Derek leaned forward sharply. "She's been talking to someone else about targeting military families?" "Marcus Chen has a criminal history involving harassment of service members," General Winters explained. "He runs an online forum dedicated to what he calls exposing military privilege. Vanessa has been active in this community for months, sharing details about your family, your home address, your schedules." The room felt like it was spinning. This wasn't just sibling jealousy or wedding day revenge. Vanessa had connected with people who specifically targeted military families, and she had been feeding them information about us for months. "She gave them our address?" I asked, instinctively holding Isabella closer. "Among other things," General Winters said grimly. Your work schedules, Derek's deployment history, when you were due to give birth. She's been systematically gathering intelligence and sharing it with people who have expressed anti-military sentiments. Derek stood up abruptly, his hands clenched into fists. This is espionage. She's been conducting surveillance on an active-duty Marine and sharing classified information about base operations. That's exactly what this is, General Winters confirmed. And that changes everything about how we handle this situation. This is no longer a family dispute or even simple property destruction. This is a potential national security issue. I felt like I was falling down a rabbit hole, discovering that my sister's betrayal was far deeper and more dangerous than I had imagined. What kind of information was she sharing? General Winters consulted his notes. Derek's unit designation, deployment schedules, details about base security procedures she learned from conversations with you. Information about other military families in your neighborhood, including their children's school schedules. The magnitude of what Vanessa had done was staggering. She hadn't just attacked our family, she had potentially endangered every military family in our community. The woman I had trusted with our spare key had been conducting a months-long intelligence operation against us and our neighbors. There's more, General Winters said, his voice heavy. We believe the nursery destruction was meant to be filmed. We found evidence that she set up a camera to record the damage, likely to share with her online community as proof of her commitment to their cause. Derek sank back down beside me, his face pale. She was going to broadcast our destroyed nursery to a group of people who hate military families. The camera malfunctioned, General Winters continued. But we found it hidden in the closet, along with a note outlining her plans to, quote, document the consequences of military arrogance. I couldn't speak. The sister I had grown up with, the woman I had made excuses for and tried to understand for decades, had become someone I didn't recognize. This level of planning, this deliberate cruelty, this betrayal of not just our family but our entire community, it was beyond anything I had imagined her capable of. What happens now? Derek asked quietly. Now we involve federal authorities, General Winters said. The FBI takes threats to military families very seriously, especially when they involve organized groups and potential terrorism connections. Vanessa's activities have crossed the line from family dispute to national security concern. He gathered the documents back into his folder. I want you both to understand that this is no longer about punishment or revenge. This is about protecting not just your family but every military family in this area. Vanessa's actions have put people in danger, and that requires a response proportional to the threat. After General Winters left, Derek and I sat in stunned silence. Isabella slept peacefully in her temporary bassinet, completely unaware that her aunt had spent months planning an attack that went far beyond simple jealousy or sibling rivalry. I keep thinking about all the conversations I had with her, I said finally. All the times I told her about your work, about our neighbors, about base events I attended. I thought I was sharing family news. I had no idea she was collecting intelligence. Derek reached over and took my hand. You couldn't have known. No one expects their own family member to be conducting surveillance operations. My phone buzzed with another unknown number, and my heart rate spiked. But when I answered, it was Detective Hayes. Mrs. Winters, I wanted to update you on the investigation. We've arrested Vanessa Brooks at her apartment in Phoenix. She's being charged with breaking and entering, destruction of property, harassment, and cyberstalking. The federal charges are pending review. Relief flooded through me. She's actually in custody? Yes, and we found additional evidence during the arrest. Multiple phones, recording equipment, and extensive documentation of her surveillance activities. She's been monitoring military families across 3 states. The scope of what Vanessa had been doing was staggering. This wasn't just about attacking Derek and me. She had been part of a network targeting military families throughout the Southwest. What happens next? I asked. The federal investigators will take over the case, Detective Hayes explained. But you and your family are safe. She won't be getting bail given the national security implications. After ending the call, I looked down at Isabella's peaceful face and felt something settle in my chest. The woman who had tried to destroy our homecoming, who had spent months planning to attack our family, was finally facing consequences for her actions. It's over, Derek said, reading my expression. No, I said quietly, thinking about the online community Vanessa had joined, the other families who might be targeted, the children who deserve to grow up safe on military bases. It's just beginning. But this time, we're not fighting alone. Through our front window, I could see a Marine patrol car parked discreetly at the end of our street. General Winters had mentioned increased security for all the families Vanessa had compromised, but seeing it made the protection feel real and immediate. Isabella stirred in her bassinet, making the small mewing sounds that meant she was waking up hungry. As I lifted her to feed her, I thought about the future I wanted to build for her. Not one where she walked on eggshells around toxic family members, not one where she learned to minimize her own happiness to accommodate other people's jealousy. My daughter would grow up knowing that her family protected each other, that her grandfather commanded respect because he earned it, that her father served his country with honor. She would learn that some boundaries are worth defending, that some betrayals are unforgivable, and that real family protects and supports each other rather than tearing each other down. The woman who had destroyed our nursery was sitting in a federal holding cell, facing charges that could put her away for years. But more importantly, she had lost all power to hurt us. The fear and intimidation she had tried to create had backfired spectacularly, activating protections and support systems she never could have imagined. Looking down at Isabella's trusting face, I realized that in trying to destroy our family, Vanessa had actually made us stronger. We now knew exactly who we could count on, exactly what we were capable of when threatened, and exactly how far our chosen family would go to protect us. The war Vanessa had started was indeed just beginning, but she had picked the wrong enemy and underestimated the forces she was fighting against. The federal courthouse in downtown Los Angeles was an imposing structure of gray stone and bulletproof glass, designed to project the weight and authority of American justice. As Derek and I walked through the metal detectors with Isabella strapped to my chest in her carrier, I felt the gravity of what was about to unfold. This wasn't just about property damage or family dysfunction anymore. This was about national security, organized threats against military families, and a network of domestic terrorism that had used my sister as their inside source. Agent Sarah Coleman from the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Unit met us in the witness preparation room. She was a compact woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and an efficient manner that reminded me of General Winters. Her handshake was firm, and she looked directly at Isabella with the kind of professional assessment that suggested she understood exactly what was at stake. Mrs. Winters, Captain Winters, thank you for coming in today. I know this hasn't been easy for your family, especially with a newborn. Agent Coleman settled across from us at a polished conference table, opening a thick file that I recognized contained months of investigation into Vanessa's activities. Before we proceed with the hearing, I want you to understand the full scope of what we've uncovered. She spread several photographs across the table, surveillance images that made my blood run cold. They showed our house from multiple angles, taken over several weeks leading up to Isabella's birth. But what made them truly disturbing was the level of detail they captured. Derek leaving for work in his uniform, me walking to the mailbox in my maternity clothes, even images of our neighbors' children playing in their yards. Your sister wasn't working alone, Agent Coleman continued. She was part of a coordinated surveillance operation targeting military families across California, Arizona, and Nevada. The group calls itself the Civilian Truth Network, and they've been gathering intelligence on base operations, family schedules, and security vulnerabilities. Derek leaned forward, his military training evident in the way he studied the photos. How long had they been watching us? Based on digital evidence, approximately 8 months. The surveillance intensified significantly during your pregnancy, with particular focus on documenting your daily routines and preparing for what they called, quote, impact events. The clinical terminology made my skin crawl. To them, Isabella's birth hadn't been a joyous family moment. It had been an opportunity to cause maximum psychological damage to a military family. Impact events? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Agent Coleman consulted her notes. Moments of particular vulnerability or significance when an attack would cause the greatest emotional and psychological damage. Births, deployments, homecomings, military ceremonies. They studied military families specifically to identify these moments and exploit them. She pulled out another document, and I recognized Vanessa's handwriting immediately. It was a detailed report she had written about our family, cataloging everything from Derek's rank and unit assignment to my pregnancy due date and our plans for Isabella's nursery. She provided them with what essentially amounts to a complete intelligence dossier on your family, Agent Coleman explained. But more concerning is this final entry, written the day before you went into labor. I read the words with growing horror. Target family confirmed vulnerable during birth event. Primary asset, female civilian, will be incapacitated. Secondary asset, male military, will be focused on medical emergency. Window for maximum impact operation, 18 to 24 hours. Nursery destruction will demonstrate that military families are not protected, even in their most intimate spaces. The calculated nature of it was breathtaking. While I was preparing for the most beautiful moment of my life, Vanessa was planning it as a psychological warfare operation. She had studied us like enemy combatants, identified our moment of greatest vulnerability, and coordinated an attack designed to shatter our sense of safety and security. There's something else, Agent Coleman said, her voice becoming even more serious. We believe the nursery attack was meant to be the first phase of a larger operation. We found evidence of plans to target other military families in your neighborhood during similar vulnerable moments. Derek's hands clenched into fists on the table. They were planning to attack other families with newborns? Among other targets. Military families during deployment farewells, children during school events, spouses during military ceremonies. They had developed what they called quote, vulnerability calendars for dozens of families across 3 states. The magnitude of what we had unknowingly stumbled into was staggering. By fighting back against Vanessa's attack on our family, we had exposed a network that was planning systematic psychological warfare against military communities throughout the Southwest. How many families were at risk? I asked, instinctively holding Isabella closer. Based on the evidence we recovered, at least 47 families were under active surveillance, with detailed attack plans prepared for 32 of them. Your sister's arrest and the exposure of the network prevented what could have been a coordinated campaign of domestic terrorism. The weight of responsibility settled on my shoulders. If we had chosen to handle Vanessa's attack quietly, if we had accepted my parents' suggestion to keep it within the family, dozens of other families would have faced the same violation we had experienced. The preliminary hearing today will determine whether the case proceeds to federal trial, Agent Coleman continued. Your testimony will be crucial in establishing the personal impact of these crimes and the broader threat they represent to military families. An hour later, I found myself in a federal courtroom, facing the woman who had shared my childhood bedroom and birthday parties, who had been my maid of honor and had helped me choose my wedding dress. Vanessa sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back severely and her face showing none of the remorse I had hoped to see. When our eyes met across the courtroom, she didn't look away or show any sign of shame. Instead, she stared at me with an expression of cold calculation, as if she was still studying me for weaknesses, still planning her next move. It was like looking at a stranger wearing my sister's face. The federal prosecutor, a stern woman named Michelle Torres, presented the evidence methodically. Photographs of our destroyed nursery. Transcripts of Vanessa's communications with the Civilian Truth Network. Documentation of the surveillance operation. And testimony from other military families who had been targeted by the group. But it was when they played audio recordings of Vanessa's planning sessions that the full scope of her betrayal became clear. Her voice, captured by FBI surveillance of the group's meetings, discussed our family with clinical detachment. The target family has optimal vulnerability factors. Vanessa's recorded voice filled the courtroom. Female civilian highly invested in domestic preparation, male military asset, emotionally compromised by imminent fatherhood. The nursery represents maximum psychological investment. Destroying it during the birth event will create lasting trauma. Listening to my sister discuss my pregnancy and Derek's emotions as tactical advantages in a psychological warfare operation was surreal and devastating. This wasn't the woman who had helped me pick out Isabella's first outfit, or who had claimed to be excited about becoming an aunt. This was someone who had studied us, like a predator studies prey. When it came time for victim impact statements, Derek spoke first. His military bearing was evident as he addressed the court, but his voice carried the emotion of a father protecting his family. Your Honor, my wife and I served our country in different ways. I wore the uniform, and she supported that service through deployments, relocations, and the challenges of military life. We never expected the greatest threat to our family's security to come from within our own family. He gestured toward the evidence table where photos of our destroyed nursery were displayed. This attack wasn't just about property damage. It was designed to make us feel unsafe in our own home, uncertain about who we could trust, afraid during what should have been the happiest moment of our lives. It was psychological warfare conducted by someone we loved and trusted. When my turn came to speak, I stood with Isabella in my arms, looking directly at Vanessa as I addressed the court. She met my gaze without flinching, her expression remaining cold and calculating. Your Honor, I've spent my entire life making excuses for my sister's behavior. I told myself she was just jealous, just struggling, just misunderstood. I convinced myself that family loyalty meant accepting her attacks on my happiness and my marriage. I paused, looking down at Isabella's peaceful face before continuing. But this wasn't jealousy or sibling rivalry. This was a calculated attack on my family during our most vulnerable moment. While I was in labor, fighting to bring my daughter safely into the world, the person I trusted most was destroying the home we had prepared for her. The courtroom was silent, except for the soft sound of Isabella's breathing. I can't undo the damage she caused to our nursery, but I can make sure that no other military family experiences what we went through. My daughter will grow up knowing that some boundaries cannot be crossed, that some betrayals have consequences, and that protecting your family sometimes means standing up to the people who claim to love you. Vanessa's attorney, a public defender who looked overwhelmed by the complexity of the case, attempted to argue that his client had been manipulated by the larger network, that she was more victim than perpetrator, but the evidence was overwhelming. Hundreds of photographs she had taken, detailed reports she had written, recordings of her participating enthusiastically in planning sessions. Judge Patricia Hernandez listened to all the testimony with the grave attention that the case deserved. When the attorneys finished their arguments, she addressed the courtroom with the authority of someone who understood the broader implications of what was being decided. This case represents far more than a family dispute or even simple property destruction, Judge Hernandez said. The evidence shows a coordinated effort to target military families through surveillance, intelligence gathering, and psychological warfare tactics designed to undermine their sense of security and well-being. She looked directly at Vanessa, who maintained her defiant stare. Ms. Brooks, you used your position as a trusted family member to conduct surveillance operations against active-duty military personnel. You gathered classified information about base operations and security procedures. You coordinated with known anti-government extremists to plan attacks on families who serve our country. The judge's voice grew stronger as she continued. Your actions represent a clear and present danger to national security and to the military families who sacrifice so much in service to our nation. This court finds sufficient evidence to proceed to federal trial on all charges. As Vanessa was led away in handcuffs, she turned to look at me one final time. I expected to see anger or resentment, but what I saw was something worse. A complete absence of regret or recognition of the harm she had caused. The woman being led away wasn't my sister anymore. She was someone who had chosen ideology over family, hatred over love, destruction over healing. Outside the courthouse, General Winters was waiting with Carol and several other military families who had been targeted by the network. When an FBI director's family becomes the target of domestic extremism, it raises national security concerns. We're treating this as a potential terrorist incident until resolved. Agent Kim stepped forward with additional intelligence that would prove crucial to understanding the scope of the threat we were facing. Sir, our communications intercepts suggest that Frank Peterson has been in contact with militia groups throughout the region. He's promising that success here will demonstrate that federal property seizures can be successfully resisted through armed occupation. The words hit me like physical blows, each revelation expanding the scope of my parents' betrayal beyond anything I could have imagined. They weren't just stealing my inheritance, they were using my grief and my husband's federal position to fuel anti-government extremism that could endanger innocent people throughout Pennsylvania. Kenneth Walsh arrived at the scene shortly after 9 a.m., his usually impeccable appearance showing signs of strain as he surveyed the law enforcement presence surrounding what should have been a simple estate matter. "Director Thompson, Mrs. Thompson," he said, his voice carrying the bewilderment of a legal professional confronting something outside normal jurisprudence. "Mr. Walsh," David replied, "we need you to make one final attempt at legal resolution before this situation escalates further. Can you approach the property and formally read the court injunction to the occupiers?" Walsh nodded gravely, understanding that his role was to provide documentation that peaceful resolution had been attempted before federal law enforcement took more aggressive action. As he walked toward the house carrying official legal documents, I held my breath, hoping against hope that my parents might still possess enough sanity to recognize the futility of their position. The response from inside the house was swift and unambiguous. Frank's voice, amplified by what sounded like a bullhorn, echoed across the lake with words that made my blood run cold. "Kenneth Walsh, you are trespassing on Peterson family property in service of federal tyranny. Leave immediately or face the consequences of supporting government theft." Walsh retreated quickly, his face pale with the realization that legal reasoning had no power over the extremist mindset that had taken hold inside Henry's peaceful lake house. The room looked nothing like the original lavender paradise Derek and I had created, but it was more beautiful than I could have imagined. The walls were now a soft sage green, with a mural depicting a peaceful forest where woodland creatures watched over sleeping children. Isabella's crib, a sturdy oak piece that General Winters had commissioned from a local craftsman, sat beneath a window that looked out onto our backyard where Derek was installing a swing set for the day when she would be old enough to use it. The trial had concluded 6 weeks ago with Vanessa receiving a 15-year federal sentence for domestic terrorism, conspiracy against the United States, and coordinating attacks on military families. The Civilian Truth Network had been completely dismantled, with 17 members across 4 states receiving sentences ranging from 5 to 20 years. But more importantly, the FBI had used the intelligence gathered from our case to identify and prevent attacks on 43 other military families who had been targeted for impact events. Isabella babbled contentedly in my arms, reaching for the mobile that rotated slowly above her changing table. Each figure represented something meaningful: a Marine emblem for her father, a butterfly for the dreams that had been destroyed and rebuilt stronger, a star for the guidance we had found in unexpected places, and a heart for the family that had chosen to protect us when our biological family had failed. "She's getting so big," Carol said from the doorway, her arms full of the homemade baby food she insisted on bringing every week. Derek's mother had become the grandmother I had always hoped for, filling the void left by my own parents who had chosen to support Vanessa even after her conviction. "Look at those eyes. She's going to be trouble just like her daddy was." I laughed, settling into the rocking chair that had somehow survived Vanessa's destruction. It seemed fitting that the one piece of furniture she hadn't destroyed was the chair where I would spend countless hours holding my daughter, reading to her, singing lullabies, and building the foundation of trust and love that would define our relationship. "Any word from Phoenix?" Carol asked gently, though we both knew the answer. My parents had attended exactly 1 day of Vanessa's trial, sitting in the gallery behind the defense table and refusing to make eye contact with Derek or me. When the verdict was read and Vanessa was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison, my mother had stood up and walked out without a word. My father had sent a single text message 2 weeks later. "We hope you're happy with what you've done to this family." I hadn't responded. There was nothing left to say to people who could watch months of evidence about domestic terrorism and surveillance operations and still believe that I was the one who had destroyed our family. They had made their choice, and I had made mine. "I got a letter from them yesterday," I said, pulling the envelope from Isabella's diaper bag. "They want to meet Isabella. They say enough time has passed, and family should forgive family." Carol's expression hardened in a way that reminded me she had been a Marine wife for 30 years and knew something about protecting her own. "And what did you tell them?" "I haven't responded yet. Part of me wonders if Isabella deserves the chance to know her grandparents, even if they're I trailed off, trying to find words for parents who had spent 8 months defending a convicted domestic terrorist, rather than supporting their daughter and new granddaughter. Nat, Carol said, settling into the chair Derek had placed near the window for her weekly visits. I've watched a lot of military families navigate difficult relationships with civilian relatives who don't understand the sacrifices we make. But this isn't about misunderstanding military life. This is about people who chose to support someone who attacked their own daughter during childbirth. She gestured toward Isabella, who was contentedly chewing on a soft toy shaped like a helicopter that one of Derek's Marines had given her. That little girl is going to grow up surrounded by people who fought to protect her before she could even hold her head up. She's got a grandfather who deployed federal resources to keep her safe, a father who would move heaven and earth for her, and a mother who stood up to terrorists to protect other families. Why would you want to expose her to people who think that was wrong? Before I could answer, the doorbell rang downstairs. Through the window, I could see a familiar black SUV in our driveway. General Winters had maintained his weekly visits even after the trial ended, claiming he needed regular updates on his granddaughter's development, but really just wanting to spend time with Isabella and ensure our family remained secure. Derek's voice carried up from the front door, followed by the sound of multiple sets of footsteps on the stairs. When General Winters appeared in the nursery doorway, he wasn't alone. Behind him were Agent Coleman and a woman I didn't recognize wearing a Navy dress uniform. Natalie, Derek, General Winters said, his voice carrying the formal tone he used for official business. I'd like you to meet Lieutenant Commander Jessica Walsh from Navy Special Operations. She has something she'd like to discuss with you. Lieutenant Commander Walsh stepped forward with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to command. She was a compact woman in her late 30s with intelligent eyes and the kind of focused intensity that reminded me of Agent Coleman. Mrs. Winters, Captain Winters, she said, offering a firm handshake. I'm here to brief you on something that's developed from your case. May we sit down? We settled in the living room, Isabella content to sit on my lap and study the new faces around her. General Winters took his usual chair, the one that gave him clear sightlines to all the windows and entrances, habits from 40 years of military service that had become second nature. The intelligence you provided through your testimony, and the evidence gathered from your sister's activities, has led to a significant national security operation, Lieutenant Commander Walsh began. The Civilian Truth Network was more extensive than we initially realized, with connections to hostile foreign actors who were using domestic extremists to gather intelligence on military installations and personnel. Derek leaned forward sharply. Foreign actors? Based on communications we recovered from the network's servers, several members were in contact with intelligence operatives from countries that consider themselves strategic competitors to the United States. Your sister's surveillance reports on Camp Pendleton operations and personnel movements were being forwarded to handlers who were building detailed assessments of our West Coast military readiness. The room fell silent except for Isabella's happy babbling. The magnitude of what we had stumbled into continued to expand in ways I couldn't have imagined. What had started as a family dispute over a destroyed nursery had led to exposing a network of domestic terrorists who were collaborating with foreign intelligence services. The information gathered from your case has been used to identify and neutralize similar networks operating near military installations across the country, Agent Coleman added. 17 separate cells have been disrupted, and we've prevented what intelligence analysts believe could have been coordinated attacks on military families during major holidays and deployment cycles. Lieutenant Commander Walsh consulted her notes. Mrs. Winters, your decision to pursue federal charges rather than handle this as a family matter has directly resulted in protecting hundreds of military families from surveillance and potential attacks. The Navy would like to recognize your contribution to national security. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out an official-looking document. This is a citation for civilian service to the United States Navy, recognizing your role in exposing and disrupting a significant threat to military personnel and their families. I stared at the document, reading my name printed in formal script above language describing my, quote, in the face of personal attack and dedication to protecting military families. It seemed surreal that standing up to my sister's cruelty had led to this moment. There's something else, General Winters said, his voice softer now. The Marine Corps would like to offer you a position as a civilian consultant on family security awareness. Your experience with identifying and responding to threats from trusted individuals could help other military families recognize similar dangers. Derek reached over and squeezed my hand. It's your choice, Nat, but I think you'd be incredible at helping other families. I looked down at Isabella, who was reaching for the citation in my hands with curious fingers. 8 months ago, I had been a woman who made excuses for toxic behavior, who prioritized keeping peace over protecting myself, who believed that family loyalty meant accepting abuse. The woman holding the citation was someone I barely recognized, stronger, clearer about boundaries, willing to fight for what mattered. I'd like to think about it, I said. But yes, I'm interested. After the Navy and FBI representatives left, General Winters stayed for dinner, as had become his custom. Derek grilled chicken on our back patio while Carol and I prepared vegetables in the kitchen, and General Winters sat in the living room reading military manuals to Isabella in the same serious tone he probably used to brief Pentagon officials. She's going to grow up thinking that's how bedtime stories are supposed to sound, I said to Carol, watching through the doorway as Isabella stared intently at her grandfather while he explained Marine Corps logistics procedures. Could be worse, Carol replied with a smile. She could grow up thinking normal people abandon their children when they stand up to terrorists. The comment was gentle but pointed, and I knew she was referring to my parents' letter. You really think I shouldn't let them meet her? Carol set down the cutting board and looked at me seriously. Natalie, I've been a military wife for 3 decades. I've seen families torn apart by deployments, by disagreements over career choices, by the stress of constant moves and uncertainty. But I've never seen parents abandon their child for protecting their family from a terrorist attack. She gestured toward the living room, where General Winters was now showing Isabella pictures from his military career, pointing out different uniforms and explaining the significance of various medals and ribbons. That man has commanded thousands of Marines in combat situations. He's made life-and-death decisions that affected national security. And every week, he drives an hour each way to spend time with his granddaughter and make sure his son's family is safe and happy. That's what grandparents do. I knew she was right. The letter from my parents wasn't really about wanting to meet Isabella. It was about trying to reestablish control, to force me back into the pattern of prioritizing their comfort over my family's safety. They wanted me to pretend that Vanessa's conviction for domestic terrorism was somehow my fault, that choosing to protect my daughter made me the villain in this story. That evening, after General Winters and Carol had gone home and Derek was giving Isabella her bath, I sat at my desk and wrote a response to my parents' letter. I kept it simple and clear, without anger or explanation. Patricia and Michael, thank you for your letter. I understand that you would like to meet Isabella. However, after careful consideration, Derek and I have decided that we will not be introducing our daughter to family members who supported someone who was convicted of domestic terrorism against military families. This decision is final and non-negotiable. I wish you both well, Natalie. I sealed the letter and placed it in our outgoing mail, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders that I hadn't realized I was carrying. There would be no more attempts to manage my parents' feelings. No more hoping they would eventually understand. No more energy wasted on people who had chosen their side when it mattered most. 3 weeks later, I started my new position with the Marine Corps Family Readiness Group, developing programs to help military families identify and respond to threats from trusted individuals. My first presentation was to a group of Marines' wives at Camp Pendleton, sharing our story and the warning signs we had missed. The most dangerous threats to military families often come from people we trust, I told the group of 30 women gathered in the base community center. Family members, close friends, neighbors who have access to our homes and our routines. They know our schedules, our children's activities, our spouses' deployment cycles. I clicked to the next slide, showing some of the surveillance photos that had been taken of our house. Vanessa lived with us for a week before Isabella was born. She had complete access to our home, our computers, our mail. She knew Derek's unit designation, his work schedule, even the security codes for our neighborhood. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. How do you know when someone you trust is actually gathering intelligence? The signs are often subtle, I replied, thinking back to all the conversations with Vanessa that I had interpreted as sisterly interest but were actually intelligence gathering. Unusual interest in your spouse's work details, asking about base security procedures, taking photos of your home or neighborhood that seem unnecessary, storing information about your family in ways that seem excessive. Another woman asked, "What do you do if you suspect someone?" You document everything. You trust your instincts and you report it immediately. The FBI takes threats to military families very seriously, especially when they involve people with insider access. After the presentation, several women approached me with their own stories. One had a brother-in-law who constantly asked about base operations. Another had noticed a neighbor taking unusual interest in the comings and goings of military families in their area. A third had received friend requests on social media from people who seemed to know a lot about her husband's deployment schedule. The hardest part is that it feels like paranoia, said Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez, whose husband was deployed to the Middle East. You don't want to suspect everyone who's friendly or interested in your life. It's not paranoia when it's based on real threats, I replied. And you're not alone in dealing with it. That's why programs like this exist, so you have support and resources when something doesn't feel right. Driving home from the base that evening, I thought about how much my life had changed since Isabella's birth. The woman who had walked into Riverside Medical Center 8 months ago had been focused on creating a perfect nursery and hoping her family would rally around her new daughter. The woman driving home now was someone who understood that real family protects each other, that some boundaries cannot be crossed, and that standing up to threats, even from people you love, is sometimes the most loving thing you can do. Isabella was sitting in her high chair when I got home, enthusiastically spreading mashed sweet potatoes across the tray while Derek attempted to get some actual food into her mouth. She looked up at me with Derek's dark eyes and smiled, revealing 2 tiny teeth that had appeared seemingly overnight. How was the presentation? Derek asked, wiping orange food from Isabella's chin. Good, really good. I think I'm going to like this job. I settled into the chair next to Isabella's high chair and offered her a piece of soft banana. 3 women came up to me afterward with situations they wanted advice about. Real concerns, not paranoia. That's exactly why Dad wanted you for this position, Derek said. You understand what it's like to be betrayed by someone you trusted completely. Most people can't relate to that level of violation. Isabella grabbed my finger with her tiny sticky hand and babbled something that sounded almost like, Mama. My heart melted the way it did every time she seemed to recognize me, every time she chose to reach for me when she was tired or hurt or just wanted comfort. I got another letter from Phoenix today, Derek said quietly, nodding toward the mail stack on the counter. I didn't need to ask who it was from. My parents had been writing increasingly desperate letters since receiving my final response, alternating between anger and manipulation, threats and guilt trips. The latest had been from my father, claiming that my vindictive behavior was destroying what was left of our family and that Isabella deserved to know her grandparents despite my personal feelings. Did you read it? I asked. Just enough to know it's more of the same. They want you to feel guilty for protecting our family. I looked at Isabella, who was now contentedly chewing on a piece of soft bread, and watching us with the kind of trust that comes from knowing you are completely safe and loved. She would never know the grandparents who had chosen ideology over family, but she would grow up surrounded by people who had fought to protect her before she could even say their names. Throw it away, I said. All of them. From now on, anything from Phoenix goes straight in the trash. I'm done letting them take up space in our home. That weekend, Carol and General Winters came for Isabella's first birthday party. The guest list was small but meaningful. Derek's Marine unit, several neighbors who had become genuine friends, Agent Coleman and her family, and Lieutenant Commander Walsh, who had driven down from San Diego. The backyard was decorated with balloons and a banner that read, Isabella's first year of being loved and protected. Isabella sat in her high chair wearing a pink dress that Carol had made, enthusiastically destroying a small cake while everyone sang happy birthday. She had no idea that this celebration was also marking the anniversary of the day that changed everything for our family, the day that taught us who we could really count on and who would stand with us when it mattered most. Any regrets? Agent Coleman asked as we watched Isabella smear frosting in her hair while the adults laughed and took pictures. I thought about the question seriously. Did I regret calling the police on Vanessa? Did I regret pursuing federal charges? Did I regret cutting off my parents who had spent a year defending a convicted domestic terrorist? None, I said, watching Derek help Isabella take her first unsteady steps across the grass toward General Winters, who was kneeling with his arms outstretched. Every choice we made protected other families. Every boundary we set made Isabella safer. Every person we lost was someone who chose cruelty over love. As the party wound down and guests began to leave, I found myself in the nursery with Isabella, rocking her to sleep while she clutched a stuffed marine bear that one of Derek's men had given her. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of her breathing and the distant murmur of Derek and his father cleaning up in the backyard. The woman who had destroyed this room while I was in labor was serving the third month of a 15-year federal sentence. The parents who had defended her were living in Phoenix, probably still convinced that they were the victims in this story. The terrorist network that had used our family as a test case had been completely dismantled, and dozens of other military families were safe because we had chosen to fight back. Isabella stirred in my arms, making the small sounds that meant she was dreaming. I wondered what she would dream about. Probably the faces of people who loved her, the sound of her grandfather's voice reading her military manuals, the feeling of being completely safe and protected in every moment of her young life. This was the legacy I wanted to leave her. Not the pain of family betrayal or the trauma of terrorist attacks, but the knowledge that when people you trust try to hurt you, you fight back. When they attack your family, you protect each other. When they try to make you live in fear, you build something stronger and more beautiful than what they destroyed. The butterflies that had once decorated these walls were gone, replaced by stars and woodland creatures that would watch over Isabella as she grew. But the real protection came from the family we had chosen and built. People who understood that love means standing up for each other, that loyalty means protecting the vulnerable, and that some battles are worth fighting no matter how difficult they become. Looking down at my daughter's peaceful face, I realized that Vanessa's greatest failure wasn't attacking our family during our most vulnerable moment. It was underestimating how strong we would become when we finally stopped making excuses for people who chose to hurt us and started building our lives around people who chose to protect us. Isabella would grow up knowing that her family fought for her before she could even speak, that her grandfather deployed federal resources to keep her safe, that her parents chose justice over peace and protection over convenience. She would never have to wonder whether the people who claimed to love her would actually stand by her when it mattered most. The war that began in this nursery was finally over, and we had won something more valuable than victory. We had won the peace that comes from knowing exactly who you can count on, exactly what you're willing to fight for, and exactly how strong you become when you stop letting toxic people define your life. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.